Hello, hello, hello. Welcome into another edition of Behind the Glass Sports. I'm Hardy Grimm, joined by Mr. Will Miller. Our dear co-host, Mr. Aiden Dollins, is not going to be able to make it tonight. Had a tough trip sledding through the woods. Got in trouble with a little bit of poison sumac, so he's going to be out of commission for tonight. Hopefully, he can be back on next week. But Will, I don't know who's feeling more pain right now. Aiden sitting on his couch with the poison sumac that he's dealing with, or all of Crimson Tide Nation after the trip up to Nashville, Tennessee, First Bank Stadium, losing to the Vanderbilt Commodores.
Well, that's a crazy sentence, no doubt about it. And yet, it's a real thing that happened. And I sincerely hope that our viewers aren't finding out through this show, but I can't imagine they are, as this
I,
news has swept
that would
across the
be
landscape of college sports. But as to your question, Hardy, you tell me you were actually on the trip yourself to First Bank Stadium slash active construction zone.
yeah. Active construction zone was about 85% Alabama fans. A sea of crimson uh, enveloped the stadium, and from the jump, uh, that sea of crimson was not able to get loud, get very ramped up. Tide fell behind two scores quick, and they had to try to fight back throughout the game. Made it a one-score game kind of late, but could not seem to get off the field. Um, Third down. I mean, hey, shout out to Clark Lee, shout out to Diego Pavia. Uh, they're trying to put together. Clark Lee is trying to put together a respectable program up there in Nashville. Um, Pavia, we know his history at New Mexico State. Was the Conference USA Player of the Year last year. Transferred over from there. But this one hurts. Um, After 5 days, it hurts a little bit less than it did about 45 minutes after I left the stadium. But at the end of the day, there's a lot to be said about this, that the Tide hasn't lost to Vanderbilt in, I believe, it was 23 or 24 straight games. I think 1984 was the last time the Tide had lost to them. Vanderbilt coming into this game 0-60 all time against number one AP ranked opponents. Um, I figured they were going to upset someone this season. I just, in my heart of hearts, absolutely did not think it was going to be the Tide.
Well, and that's I think that underscores a lot of people, whether they're on the extreme end or not, reaction wise. That's where people's thoughts are. I mean, sure, and Alabama football is not used to losing trap games anyway because it just didn't happen. But to Vanderbilt,
Yeah,
Vanderbilt has made a lot of strides, no question. I mean, they're better at the quarterback position than most people in
they've
our age
probably
group
been
have
in,
seen.
yeah,
Um, I feel like he might have earned close to ever distinction. This isn't 1906. This isn't the early days of the forward pass. I mean, I think saying those things in correlation with the analysis of the game is pretty indicative of the level and magnitude of this loss for the Alabama program. But speaking of reactions, I guess it's something of a premonition for you. You have been critical of Kane Womack on this program before, and in other mediums. With that in mind, where's your head at on that front?
um, we have seen this been built up uh, pretty much since the start of the season. Western Kentucky was able to very effectively drive the ball down the field, at least the first drive of the game before the TJ Finley experience set in and he started throwing interceptions like he was a madman. But this Alabama defense has been porous um, throughout most of the season. South Florida, if you go back and watch the game, the amount of open receivers, wide open looks they had, it's a miracle that the Crimson Tide got out of that game without a loss. Um, Obviously, you look at the final score and they put Elijah Pritchett in, they start running the ball more effectively, this, that, the other, whatever. But South Florida had more than ample opportunities to score points on a lot of big plays. They were running the ball really, really well. Quarterback was making a lot of plays with his feet. We saw Georgia in the second half, uh, 2 weekends ago, absolutely dice up this Kane Womack defense. And, people are going to sit there and say, does the 4-2-5 work? It's a nickel defense. It's worked for, 40 years. Like, don't worry about the numbers on what the scheme is. Worry about what kind of coverages they're running. Worry about not being able to adjust whatsoever to what a team is doing. First half against Georgia, they were dialed in, and Mike Bobo was dumb enough to fall into the trap of playing the "we have better athletes than you" game. And Alabama was able to win a lot of those one-on-one battles in the first half. Second half, Georgia started playing at least a little bit, started playing smarter, and they were able to take advantage very quickly of this Alabama defense. Diego Pavia, Clark Lee, that Vanderbilt running game, it slowed down initially, after they got up a couple of scores. They weren't able to run the ball, quite as effectively in the second half of the game. There were some adjustments made there. But the third down defense, something that they were really good against Georgia, it just didn't show up whatsoever. Some of the situations where guys were put in positions that, chasing guys all the way across the field, chasing running backs out of the backfield that were, wide open, that could just get around the edge and get to first downs. There are some things that definitely need to be addressed with this defense. There's a lot of really young players, especially on the outside. But those guys in the interior have to, step up, really be vocal leaders, especially, you sit there, you watch film all week. You have to know what Vanderbilt's going to run. You know what kind of scheme they run. You have to be able to address some of these things. Get off the field on third down.
Alabama didn't get off the field for 2 weeks. They struggled mightily with it against Georgia on fourth down mostly.
Yeah.
And then you get to Vanderbilt, and they were, 12 for 18 on third downs, and they could have had one more if the receiver hadn't dropped the ball. And so to me, that's indicative of a larger problem. There's been talk about penalties. I think anybody doubting the offense, I was never raising alarm bells about the offense, but 17 minutes of possession time, 17 full minutes and 35 points, that more or less exonerates the offense, in my
Yeah.
opinion. And in that sense, if you do simple doubling, even if they'd had the ball for 34 full minutes, which is marginally over just half the game, they have 70 points. So the defense, and in another sense, the defense not getting off the field, that's part of what's eating up that clock and taking away those opportunities for the offense to make plays, which obviously Jalen Milroe did have that one pick six. I just don't think that's why they lost the game. I
No,
think
I don't think so.
Vanderbilt played the complete game. They ran the ball, down Alabama's throat. They passed the ball. They were efficient. They did. And in terms of third down, fourth down, they had that touchdown pass on 4th and 1. They made the plays they needed to when they needed to. It was just a complete football game by Vanderbilt. It's just the thing that you don't expect complete football games by Vanderbilt to be enough to beat Alabama.
Exactly. Looking at the time of possession, Alabama, as you mentioned, had 17 minutes, but Vanderbilt completely controlled the pace of the game. And when you're an Alabama team that is so quick to score, you're putting your defense back on the field pretty much immediately. Like they sit there. Vanderbilt drives the entire length of the field, goes down, scores a touchdown on an 8-play, 4-minute drive or whatever, and then you go back out there immediately, score in 48 seconds or a minute. Your defense is going to be worn out. I'm not saying the offense needs to slow the pace down whatsoever. If you score 35 points against Vanderbilt, you should be able to beat them. There's no reason to say otherwise. But, just looking at it, there really was no commitment to the run game last Saturday. You had Jam Miller
or
and Justice
Georgia.
Haynes.
That was another thing. I was in the press room for the Georgia game because I did end up approving my credentials. So shout out to the comms department, making life easier in that sense. Appreciate you guys. But I was sitting in the press room and one of my friends texted me, and I didn't see it till after the fact, to ask Kalen why the running backs were sparingly used that game. I mean, I think you have a two, and in a larger picture, you have a 2 game sample size where maybe you're starting to see some of the issues on this team are getting laid open in some fashion or another. The inability to get off the field, the marginalization of the run game. Um, yeah, penalties. I mean, it's not that they just didn't have flags against
No,
Vanderbilt. Um, that's what you're seeing, but from the coaching and playing standpoint, I mean, you now have clear indicators of what's wrong, where you need to go. I do think they need to make some changes defensively. I mean, no question in my mind. Uh, you know, I want to see some nuances in the swarm defense that haven't happened yet. I want to see the linebackers involved more, which Quay Robinson played great. I mean, that dude, he's been one of the
yeah, he's been stepping up a
breakout
lot this
players on
season.
this defense, which I thought that might happen, but it's great to see. And Jihad Campbell has been really good in the past. Still waiting on that burst from Deontay Lawson in terms of stepping forward from last year to this year. A lot of
Yeah,
optimism there. I do want to see more from the linebackers. And I thought there might be more from Kane's positions, like the Bandit and the Wolf. I thought that, you know, those, I guess, change, if you want to call them changes, whatever you want to call those unique positions, would affect the game more. Um,
yeah.
and if they're not, of course, you want to go to the drawing board and see why exactly that is. Um, but in terms of like burn the whole ship down, I'm not there at
Don't need
all.
to do that yet.
Um,
Uh,
yeah,
Immediately after the game, I was right there with send Kane Womack to the moon. Um, I still think we should send him overseas, but we don't need to send him off planet just yet. But this Alabama defense, one thing that really has not come to fruition that we've had pretty much a luxury of throughout Nick Saban's tenure is a pass rush that can get to the quarterback. Q Robinson has recorded a couple. Um, throughout the season, a couple of guys have been able to get to the quarterback in prior games, but Diego Pavia didn't touch turf last Saturday. The Crimson Tide did not record a single sack. Um, had a couple of tackles for loss. Q had 3 of those. Shout out to him. But if you're going to play a team that if you get in some of these third and long situations, and Vanderbilt got into a handful of them, they were able to convert on them. The pass rush has got to hit home. Um, there's been a name thrown around there that has not seen the field this season that a lot of people thought was going, myself included, thought was going to be able to step in and be one of the premier edge rushers in college football this season in Keon Keeley.
he
Um,
gone.
yeah, I mean, it's we
That's
already
not, and
saw.
that's not like a report or anything. That's
Yeah,
my
no,
thought.
but like, yeah, that's an opinion. I don't know what it is. It might be something schematic in terms of what they're trying to do with him position wise as to why he can't get on the field. Um, but you need something to change with this defense, something to try to get more pressure on the quarterback. Uh, a guy like Keon Keeley that is, was a standout defensive end. If there's some other issues, if he's just, if there's a work ethic thing or something else, or he's just really having trouble picking up the system, um, then, I would like to see that expressed at least at some point. I don't think they'll ever actually answer that question. But, we saw Jaheim Otis as they haven't been using him as much this season. And he's finally decided to jump ship on this Alabama program, decided to redshirt the rest of the season.
But part
And
of
he
that
will
was health
be,
problems. I mean,
yeah, I
that's
mean, but, it's one of the things that, so like his freshman season, he came in, mountain of a man, made a really, really big impact, slimmed down his sophomore season. And for whatever reason, the impact just quite hasn't been there as much, and now he's dealing with these health issues. So, again, you have all of the talent. You were able to retain, a ton of these guys that people were very worried that they were going to jump ship when Nick Saban decided to retire. Um, Now you've got to put these defensive guys in positions, especially on the defensive front, to go out there and make some plays because they've really been struggling to do that.
And the usage, I mean, I tend to assume some of that is health related, which with Keon Keeley we don't
Yeah,
know.
we have no idea.
That is a point of curiosity elsewhere than this
So,
show.
I would like to point out Qua Rusaw is awesome. Uh, he's
Mm,
done very good this season.
yeah, and glad that injury wasn't as bad as it looked
Yeah,
because
thank God because we need
we were
we need
thinking
every
that
bit of
might
that.
be a surgery type of deal. The way that looked on TV, you never want to see that. Not that you want to see anybody get hurt, but best case scenario is always a hope, and that's where things stand with him. Um, Jaheim Otis transferring, that didn't surprise me too much because I think he saw himself as one of the potential figureheads of the defensive front. That didn't happen. Um, and he's a really good player. I do think he'll land somewhere and start next year and see the field more than a fraction of the time as opposed to this year. But looking ahead, this defense, I mean, I've said I think that the linebacking core needs to be more involved. The secondary, and they got beat last weekend on stuff. I mean, I think that one thing that will serve the defense is for the safeties to remember that what their entire job is, and not get burned trying to bite,
Right.
going down low or something like that, like you saw a little bit of fundamentals. But I do want to talk about, while we're on the subject of the defensive backfield, and we don't have to, harp on this because we probably already
Right.
have in our separate conversations and everybody's heard it already. But I mean, Malachi Moore, and he's talked about it himself, but that situation, what do you have to say on that?
Um. So I mean, it 100% was an egregious thing for him to do on the field. Um, for people saying that Kalen DeBoer has lost control of this team, um, is completely off base. We saw, you know, multiple instances during the Nick Saban tenure of guys getting very upset, throwing punches, getting in fights with teammates on the sideline, all of that kind of stuff. It's a very highly emotional game. Um, but one of the things, that is a little bit different from a lot of those other situations is that most of the time it has not been a captain of the team doing this. A guy that the entire defense sits there and has to turn to, ask for answers. The guy that has played football for 5 seasons has played, probably more football games than 99% of the guys in college football right now. Um, he's expected to be a leader, and he's come out and has addressed it. And I think he's going to be a lot better going forward, especially from that point of view. But the frustration definitely showed. Um, if they're not, I believe they said they're not going to suspend him, anything like that. I'm sure they will handle that internally, or they already have. He's going to be doing rolls for the next 3 weeks after practice. Not fun if anyone has ever had to do those, but yeah, I mean they're going to address it somehow internally, and I think it's going to be a big stepping stone moment for him moving forward as a leader.
I agree, and I do think that potential exists, to use this as a learning moment, because this is a guy whose football career doesn't stop now. This is a guy with aspirations to play at the next level, whatever that may look like. Draft's not for several months, but as a fifth year player, you've got to know better. As a guy that's going to literally have the C on your chest, which Alabama didn't used to do that, you've got to know better. Um, totally normal to be frustrated after you lose. I think crucifying a 20-something-year-old kid for being mad he lost in that type of spot, is almost asinine when you consider the
Yeah,
level of weight that's put on these big time college athletes' shoulders. And you've got to remember, I mean, we were in school at the same time at one point back in the day, and it's like, we don't have that kind of nationwide, everybody's eyes on us pressure, every Saturday to perform. And I'm sure that that's difficult, and the guys have to compartmentalize that in their own ways, which is something that they're able to do, I think, pretty effectively. And hopefully there are people there that can help them do it. But point being, it's not totally out of left field like some people want to depict for somebody to experience the emotions. But regulating it and conducting yourself in such a way that, yeah, you're representing the program and you're losing with class, and these things are important. I'm sure that's exactly what the coaching staff has said to him. I do think that, and him staying on the field and not leaving the game, that's not a good look either. Um, which, and again,
yeah. I mean,
heat of the
emotions
moment,
just
hot under
running
the collar.
unbelievably high.
I'm not excusing it,
No, no,
but
absolutely not. But
that's where things stood, and he didn't handle it the best. And yeah, it was a bad look, but you can use it going forward, and that's where we are now. What's done is done. That's water under the bridge, or goalpost under the water if you want to take it literally,
yeah,
and all you can do is
um,
go forward from it.
yeah, they carried that goalpost 3 miles from First Bank Stadium um, down to the river, dumped it in there. Was going to go, out on Broadway after the game. Decided it was probably best not to do that after seeing some of those Twitter posts. So glad I made that executive decision. But moving forward to this upcoming weekend, the Crimson Tide plays another game. That's the big thing. The season is not over. It's not time to burn all the bridges, fire all the coaches, ship all of the players off to different schools, and just let them be on their merry way. The Crimson Tide does play football this Saturday. They host the South Carolina Gamecocks. Um, 11 a.m. Bryant Denny Stadium. This is another. It's kind of a dicey situation for the Tide because you're coming off arguably the biggest loss uh, since 2007 against Louisiana Monroe, and you are in a position where people are probably going to go out the night before. Stadium early on in this game might not be as loud, as some other games. So you have to make sure you go out there and play from a technical standpoint, very sound. Do not let South Carolina feel that you were coming off of a loss and all of the whole season is crash and burn now, because they will take advantage, and they have shown throughout points in the season that they can play against teams like LSU who are very high powered on offense and lack a little bit of that edge on defense. I really think they should have won that game up there in Columbia. That's a story for another day, but this is an opportunity for them to come in and really get a statement win on this season. And Alabama's got to step up and really bounce back in a big way.
Yeah, that was a good game. And South Carolina's not a bad little football team. They kind of had their way with Kentucky. Kentucky goes on to almost beat Georgia.
Yep.
Obviously, lots of discourse about that series of events. Mark Stoops. All I'm saying is you don't punt. And the reason you don't punt is you might beat Ole Miss, and had you not punted, you'd be in the top 10. But I digress. Anyway, South Carolina, they're not bad. But more importantly than that, I think they see a potentially wounded animal.
Yep.
I think that matters. The mentality matters. The perception matters, because if you give the teams, and these are SEC football players, you give them an inkling that they can beat you. And if you lose to Vanderbilt, there really is that feeling. It creeps in the back of your mind. No disrespect to Vanderbilt, but what can really happen if we're capable of getting beat by Vanderbilt? And there aren't many answers to that feelings wise could be off the table. That, if I'm thinking, but what if there's not a whole lot of that that's really out of the question, particularly with an early kick, particularly with what I'm sure has been a long week, a lot going on, and just not the best and the way of vibes. Alabama obviously should win this game. Um, and it is a big bounce back game. They could come in and dominate in all phases, and that's another possibility that could happen. But if you're South Carolina, you're certainly not. And if you were by chance going to just lay over and accept your fate, you know, last week, you're certainly not doing that now. The dynamic of this game has changed tremendously.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. And a couple of guys playing for South Carolina that are going to get a pretty good bit of burn for them. Robbie Ashford, former Auburn quarterback, does step in as a backup quarterback, gets a couple of touches a game. Raheem Rocket Sanders, transfer from Arkansas over there, playing a little Beamer ball. These are guys that are familiar with Alabama, not necessarily familiar with this current state of Alabama, the way the offense is being run, the way the defense schematically works. Um, Rocket Sanders has been a very quality back in the SEC for the past couple of seasons. He is more than capable of popping off and having a 100-plus yard game if you let him. This week is very important, really, for the defense to get its feet back under them and commit to playing a hard-nosed style of football. Getting back, not I don't want to sit here and say playing Alabama football because we played Nick Saban football the past 17 seasons. Every single team is going to be built a little bit differently. It's just a matter of can they rebound from this? The emotional letdown from last week, you have to bury it and move forward. I'm expecting those young guys to be flying around bright and early. That's going to be one of the big things.
I'm expecting the student section to be camouflaged as bleachers.
Yes,
I'm expecting that.
very, yeah. Students that it'll be a thin crowd. My
The
parents will
Pavia
be up there for the
effect,
game.
if you want to call
Yeah,
it that. You mentioned Rocket Sanders, and I think the run games on both sides will be a lot more involved this week in the game plan. Alabama, perhaps out of necessity, and South Carolina because I think he's one of their better players.
I would
Uh,
agree.
but and that's a wrinkle that Alabama has not really displayed. I mean, Jam Miller played great last week. You saw
Yeah,
him
he had two
kind of,
touchdowns,
yeah,
but
you saw him kind of have a coming out party. And you could argue, I would argue that, he could be the offensive MVP of the game. I would still give it to Jalen Milroe, but if you want to throw around awards for, a game the team lost, I guess some people would probably just tell you to have at it. But
most people would probably just say the kid's 17 years old. Did you see that crazy catch he had on the sideline?
yeah, they would, and my dad was one of them. But point being, the as I mentioned, the dynamic of this game is different than it was last week at this time. But I think the game plan is going to be different, and maybe not. You're not going to see Alabama just totally abandon what it did last week or what it has been doing, but you're going to see it mix things up a little bit more. I think.
Yeah, I think so. Delve into some deeper coverages, dig into the bag a little bit more because when you drop a game that you're not necessarily supposed to lose, um, the sense of urgency picks up a lot. We kind of came into this season, it's the 12-team playoff. If you suffer two losses, in theory, you could still possibly make it into the playoff. Um, However, the weight of those two losses is weighed a lot differently from one team to another. Um, if Vanderbilt can somehow continue to win football games, um, get bowl eligible, God forbid, win 7 games this season,
Imagine.
that loss does not look quite as bad to a playoff committee, but at this moment in time, you know, you want to put yourself in a situation where you do not lose any other football games because you still have a trip up to Knoxville, and they suffered a big loss this past weekend. You still have to go down to Baton Rouge.
The pit boss keeps
Yeah,
his job for a
keeps his
little while
job.
longer.
Um, you do have to go to Norman. Their offense is missing a lot of guys right now, but who knows? Later in the season, those guys could get back healthy and cause some problems. So dropping a game like this to a team you're not supposed to definitely makes you have to tighten up, and figure things out and try to stay out of the loss column for the rest of the season moving forward.
You've had wiggle room, and you didn't expect to spend it all in one place like this, so to speak. And
Yeah,
now that's the situation at hand. Um, you were thinking perhaps if you're Alabama, maybe if we split Tennessee and LSU, we could potentially win the rest of the games. And the SEC, there's a total bottleneck at the top right now. Even still, I mean, who is undefeated right now? Everybody has one loss, at least now. I mean, Texas A&M. Oh, Texas, yeah, of course. Except for Tech. I mean, you got Texas, and then everybody else. You've got Ole Miss one loss, Tennessee one loss, Alabama one loss, Texas A&M one loss, Georgia one loss. I mean, who will be
yeah,
that other team in the SEC championship game? Oklahoma only has the one, right? And that's to Tennessee. I mean, so Oklahoma one loss.
yeah. I mean,
Who will it be?
Vanderbilt right now. I mean, they have 2 losses in the SEC, but
No, they don't.
with
They got only one. Their other loss is Georgia State.
oh yeah, just one loss
So,
in the
I mean, in
SEC.
terms of
So
conference losses, Vanderbilt for the time
and
being, you're right there.
and the way that the current playoff system is formatted, these power conference teams, if you somehow, if you're a Vanderbilt team, and for one reason or another you finish with two or three conference losses, you could still, in theory, have a chance to make a conference championship game, and if you win that, you get invited to the playoff. So there are other avenues for teams to make the college football playoff rather than just having to win every single game during the season that we saw in the past. Now, is the two teams that match up in Atlanta probably only going to have one, maybe two conference losses? Yes. I don't imagine we're going to completely beat each other over with hammers that bad, but the world does exist that is a possibility. There's a slim chance for everyone to go on a run of this thing.
I look
The
forward to
season,
repeating these talking points in the while Army versus Navy 10-1 each for a playoff spot
yes.
plays in the background. It will be the
Well,
most American thing anyone has ever seen, and exactly what our country needs right now.
well, the fun part about it would be they play, um, and then they immediately play again the next week because it's the conference championship game.
Right, exactly.
Well,
Because now Army
would
is
they
now
just
supposed to
move
be
that
American.
because normally they play that game after conference championship week? So would they just
It's never
slide the
mattered because Army,
because they've both
Army
been
has not
bad?
been in a league, and now they're in the American with
Yeah,
Navy, which Navy's been there since 2015. I think it's either
yeah.
2014
So
or 15.
so if for whatever reason they're both 10-1, would they slide the first iteration of the Army Navy game down to conference championship week, or would they just say, or would the American
I'd
just
almost
say,
just move the game.
would the American conference just say, screw it? The Army Navy game is the conference championship.
Yeah,
We're playing
if
in
if they
Philadelphia
could
this
do
season.
that, which I don't know, their
Oh,
marketing
and
people probably wouldn't be too pleased, but
I could be wrong, but I think the American Conference Championship it's played at someone's home stadium,
it
anyways.
is. It is.
So yeah, just perfect. They've got it all. They got it all set up. We're gonna make that
It's
happen.
in FedEx Field this year, so
Oh wow.
that should be good.
Well,
I want to go to one of those games so bad you have no idea. I think that this year's game will be great. I think it could be Jeff Monken's last game as the Army head coach, depending on where their season goes from here and whether they will, make a bowl or he might not even coach the bowl if he gets another job. But I think he will leave right at this juncture. He could have before, um, but
Yeah.
anyway, I digress. Should be a great game. Looking forward to it. Lots to cover until then. Um, Alabama wise, it's shifted to a one game at a time approach for better or worse.
Absolutely. Uh, Try
And
not to look too far in the
yeah,
future. Um,
again, out of necessity, that's just where that's you've ended up here. It's one of those situations like you're probably wondering how I ended up in this situation. You've got, Alabama's like in a room right now, and Hugh Freeze is over in the other corner in the fetal position, and it's like,
yeah,
oh, this is what Diego Pavia does to a man. Um,
exactly.
that dude
But
has a stranglehold over the state in football.
he
Great story
does.
for him.
He does. Shout out to him. His NIL deals. His dream NIL deals. It was like
Yeah.
Ferrari and Lululemon and all that fun stuff. Hopefully, he gets that Ferrari deal. He's driving around Asheville in a brand new Enzo. That would be pretty sweet stuff. But Will, do you have anything else to add before we get out of here?
Uh, the Broncos are doing great. Very surprising. Make the throwbacks to full time uniforms as soon as you're able to. But Bo Nix seems to be shaping up to a perfectly passable rookie quarterback, and maybe, 3, 4, maybe even sooner down the road, 3, 4 years, he will turn into one of the elite quarterbacks in the league. Uh, Sean, that game's coming up soon, isn't it? The Saints and the
Next
Broncos.
1 week from today, I will be sitting in the Superdome watching Spencer Rattler go head to head with Bo Nix and Sean Payton. So just excited to see that game moving forward. But yeah,
I've one thing to add. One thing to add before we get out of here. Jaden Daniels is the league MVP. You coward! It's time to start admitting it. There
we'll
is
see.
no player
Big
more
game.
valuable to the state of their franchise in the National Football League than Jaden Dagum Daniels.
Yeah, I
I
think
would
he's right.
argue that in terms of quarterbacks that play football in the state of Maryland, he is second on the list. But if you want to go down that path, you are very open to do so. Big game this upcoming Sunday.
The
Um,
shell of Vinny Testaverde could hand the ball off to Derrick Henry and have him run behind this Picard fellow. Okay, you can win in Baltimore without Lamar Jackson. You cannot win in Washington D.C. without Jaden Daniels.
and with that, I think it's about time we get up out of here. Thank you for tuning in for